Good evening. Thank you for coming. We're very pleased, speakers program and students here at UCLA, to have with us the author and a great science fiction novelist, Mr. Ray Bradbury. Mr. Bradbury.
Is this going to work, I wonder? Okay.
It's going to work.
Let's try it. Thank you. Good. All right. All right, let's... I don't like being so far away from you, right? Yeah. And I don't trust these things, of course. Hey, wasn't that nice? Yeah. I see it every year, and it gets better every year. Yeah. You get so hypercritical of these things when they first come out. I went down to the Bruin so many nights. That's 6 years ago it came out. But my God, every year that's gone by, the film has gotten better. Which I can't say for The Illustrated Man, right? Forget it, yeah. Oh, swell. Good, thank you. Wonderful. There's some fairly interesting pieces of information I think you should know about this picture. Number one, Oscar Werner was afraid of fire. Fantastic, isn't it? All those scenes that you see up where Oscar Werner is handling the flamethrower, it wasn't Oscar Werner, it was a double. He was afraid to handle that thing. Understand that. The damn things are dangerous. So you notice every time there's a scene where Montag is pointing something at someone, it's from the back. You can't see his face. And next time you see the film, watch. And all the long shots where there's any real flame coming out of that gun, it's not Oscar Werner. He wouldn't do it. Yeah. Also, at the end of the film, there's a fascinating history to do with the making of this picture. Truffaut offered me the screenplay a year before production started, and I couldn't do it. I had done a play based on my novel, Fahrenheit 451, for Charles Lawton, and the play was a disaster. I was still learning how to write stage plays. And I did a very bad version of my own novel. And I was tired. I was sick of the book. I just couldn't do any more on it. So when Truffaut came to me and said, "Will you do the screenplay?" I said, "Oh God, I can't face the book again for a year or two. So I trust you. You're a wonderful filmmaker. Go do it." So he did his own screenplay with his own partner, and he took it to Oscar Werner, and Oscar Werner refused to do the film. And Truffaut said, "Why?" And Werner said, "Well, it isn't nothing like the book. So get out of my life." And Truffaut went away, and he went to Belmondo and said, "Belmondo, will you play Montag?" And Belmondo was interested, but had a film to begin. He then went back to Oscar Werner and said, "Look, if I rewrite the script closer to the original book by Bradbury, will you do it?" And Werner said, "Yes." So he rewrote the script back closer to my book. Oscar Werner then took the job, and this is the film that you see. But in the middle of making the picture, they wanted to fly me over to participate in watching the movie being made and to do a publicity short on it. But I'm a chicken about flying. And it was the middle of winter. In fact, I finally revved up my courage. I said, "I tell you what, if you get me drunk enough and put me on a jet and ship me over on ice, and unfreeze me when we get to London, and thaw me out, I'll go." So they bought the tickets, and the day came closer, and the closer it got to the day of my actually flying for the first time, the more chicken I began to feel. And 24 hours before I was supposed to leave, I said, "No, sorry, it's no use. I can't kid myself I'm going to like flying. I probably never will in my life. So get along without me. I do apologize. I'm very sorry." It's a good thing I didn't go, because I found out later that Oscar Werner and Truffaut were in the middle of a series of battles over the film about scenes, about the book, about things that Werner wanted brought from the book into the film. So toward the end, they weren't talking to each other. They were fighting every day. And in the last 3 days of shooting, Oscar Werner went to the barber and had his hair cut short. Did you notice how short his hair was there at the last? Those are the last days of shooting. Now, he shouldn't have done that. That's naughty, huh? Because his hair length is different than it is in the rest of the film. If you look, next time you see the picture, compare again. These little things are fascinating, but it was his way of attacking Truffaut, you know? And then, of course, the most miraculous thing happened the last 2 days of shooting. It began to snow. And the production man said, well, let's shut up and go back to London and wait for better weather and forget about shooting right now. And Truffaut, God bless him, said, no, let's stay and use it. So it was Truffaut's idea to stay and use the snow there in that last sequence. And it makes the whole thing, doesn't it? It's just beautiful. So here's a very good example of a creative filmmaker knowing how to go with the weather, how to use the weather that looks like it's against you, but suddenly is for you. The ending of this film proves a remarkable point, doesn't it? You can have a mediocre film, a good film. Let's just say you have a good film. If you have a brilliant ending, you have a successful film. Maybe not a brilliant film all the way down the line. But it's the ending of this film that people remember. There are all kinds of flaws in this picture. God, I could elucidate them for you, and I told Truffaut when the film was finished what I thought they were. I think the whole center of the film has a marshmallow texture. It sort of slops down in the center. But the ending is commensurate with the ending of Citizen Kane. There are two outstanding endings on two films the last 30 years. One of them is Citizen Kane with the rosebud metaphor, and the other is Fahrenheit 451. And I had nothing to do with either film. This is Truffaut. This is his concept. Yes, it's based on my novel, but his conceptualization of the visual metaphor there at the end is beautiful and touching. It was his idea to use the lines from The Weir of Hermiston. It was his idea of using the old man telling the story to the boy with the snow falling. So this is pure Truffaut, and one has to give credit where credit is due. And this is, in this particular instance, the work of a great director working at the top of his form. I'm very proud and happy with the experience, with its flaws, because, my God, most of the films that we see in our lifetime are flawed, aren't they? There's always something wrong. And you have to learn when to leave a thing alone. So I'm glad I came in tonight just where I came in. I came in the last 20 minutes, which is my favorite part of the whole film. I hope to work with Truffaut again. I've done a number of other things in films the last 18 years. I don't know how many of you know that I did the screenplay of Moby Dick. That was my first job. That's 19 years ago. It's a long time back. And I love motion pictures. I've seen every movie ever made. And many of them 20 times. I've seen Citizen Kane at least 22 times. I've seen King Kong 30 times. Yeah. I've seen Dracula 40 times. Frankenstein 45 times. Yeah. So I'm a bug for motion pictures, and I've defended the faith for 30 years or so, long before motion pictures became the in thing to do. Your generation has really discovered films more than mine did. But when I was 21 years old, I used to meet down at Santa Monica with my friend Lee Brackett, who has written a lot of good films, including Rio Bravo and The Big Sleep with William Faulkner. And Lee was my teacher. And we used to meet in Santa Monica at Muscle Beach, and we called ourselves the Muscles, Maltz, Manuscripts, and A. Bergman and Bogart Society, of two super fans. And her dream was someday to write a film for Bogart, which she finally did, and mine was to write a film for Orson Welles, which I did twice. I did the screenplay of Moby Dick, and he played the part of Father Mapple in it. And then I worked on the narration for The King of Kings 11 years ago. MGM called me in when they finished the film. They'd spent $8 million, and they called me in to write a history of the Jews, to open the film, narration to cover all the holes in the script during the whole picture, huh? And there was a script. This film was all finished, and they showed me the script. They showed me the film, and it was a script written by Philip Jordan. And they say, what'd you think of it? And I said, well, I looked over Jordan, and what did I see? Sorry about that. Okay. But a bunch of cliches staring up at me, and is the other line to that. And dreadful script by an inept writer. And if he has any relatives here tonight, you can meet me out by the door on the way out. And they had no ending for the film. They had no ending for the King of Kings. And I said to them, have you tried cracking the Bible lately? And there's several endings there. There are 4 different endings. And so I wrote 2 endings for the King of Kings for them. And it was a remarkable experience because I did an expensive ending and I did a cheap ending, because that's the way they do things at the studios. And the one that I really wanted them to do was the expensive ending. I found a remarkable thing in going through the Gospels, which I hadn't done in some years. For those of you who are Christians, I would like to try this question on you. Do you recollect this fact that the Last Supper is really not the Last Supper? There's another Last Supper after that in the book of John. I'd forgotten this. It doesn't occur in the other Gospels. But after the Last Supper, after the crucifixion, after the resurrection of Christ, on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, late at night, there's the miracle of the fishes, which occurs when Simon called Peter, throws the net over, and there's nothing, throws the net over again, and suddenly the net is full of a bounteous amount of fish. And then he and the disciples see on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, along the sand, a fire lit and a ghost standing by the fire. And they pull the boat into the shore, and they approach this figure who stands there. And there are these fish laid out on these charcoals. And the figure beyond the firelight, in the way I wrote the screenplay, stands there, and Simon called Peter, calls out, "Who's there? Who are you?" And this hand comes out in the light, and there's blood dripping down into the fire. And they know that here before them stands the ghost of Christ, who then speaks and says, Take of these fish and feed thy brethren. Take of my message and move through all the nations of the world and preach therein forgiveness of sin. And he instructs the disciples, and they eat the fish, and that's the true last supper, isn't it? Which we've all conveniently forgotten over the years, and if we ever knew. And the sun begins to rise, and the way I wrote my screenplay, Christ walks along, he bids farewell to the disciples, walks along the shore of Sea of Galilee, and instead of having the ascension the way it used to be in old films 45 or 50 years ago, where you sort of zipped people up in the clouds, pulled them up on a wire, I thought, how wonderful if you simply have him walk along the shore, and anyone that heads toward the horizon automatically goes up. When you approach the horizon, you move up in the gaze of people, so that by the time you reach the far horizon line, the heat waves of day will blend the molecules of your image and dissolve you on the horizon line, and you have ascended. And the wind comes in along the shore of the Sea of Galilee and blows away the footprints of Christ. And then the camera pulls up, and as it does so, the disciples move out to all the spokes of the compass, moving through all the nations of the world as the sun rises, and their footprints in a great wheel on the shore vanish away from the sands, and the sun arises and your film ends. Well, I thought that was a damn good ending. It's never been done before. They've never touched the book of John. It's never been shown on the screen. To me, it is the book. It is the most beautiful metaphorical ending for a film on the life of Christ. So what did they do? They chose the cheap ending. They went down to Playa del Rey some morning and got up on one of the dunes there and shot, and it cost $7,000, and they closed down the unit and they destroyed the film. That's the way the studios work. So I've had first-hand experience then with excellence on the one hand, working with a Truffaut, and with mediocrities at MGM. My producer at MGM was so mediocre. This is the kind of thinking he went through. He was I had to fight him every day. He was trying to cut Judas Iscariot out of the film. Yeah. I said, why are you trying to do this? He says, well, I don't want to make an anti-Semitic film. And I said, now, wait a minute, let's go down the line here, and let's consider the possibilities. When the film is finished and it's released all over the world, all the Baptists and all the Protestants and all the Catholics and all the Unitarians are going to come see it, and they're going to say, what happened to Judas Iscariot? And the answer is, Saul Siegel cut him out? Went back in the next day. Got him back in the film. So this is the kind of ridiculous, fearful thinking that goes on occasion. My other experience, 19 years ago, was a much more interesting and I think effective one. When I was 29 years old, I went to a radio broadcast in Hollywood of Norman Corwin's, and John Huston came to it. And God, he was my hero. And to have him in the same room was so beautiful because I wanted to rush up and grab him and say, I love you, I love your films, and God, I would love to work for you someday. But seeing him standing there, something inside me made me turn away and say, no, not now. Wait until you're ready. Wait until you have proof of your love, of your excellence to offer. It's not enough just to say to someone, I must work for you. So I didn't allow myself to be introduced that night. But God, that was hard to do, not to meet someone that you really loved. And I let 2 years go by, and I published the Martian Chronicles and the Illustrated Man. And then I called my agent. I said, now is the time. Now I have proof to offer my hero. So arrange a dinner for us, and I want to see him for 1 hour, and then maybe never again the rest of my life. So he arranged the dinner. It was St. Valentine's night. How beautiful can you get, huh? For the start of a great love affair, huh? And I met Huston, had dinner with him. We were together for an hour. I gave him all 3 of my first books. And I said, here's my proof. I already know yours. We are fated to work together. We must work together. Chutzpah. But he took the 3 books off to Africa and made The African Queen. And while he was shooting the film, he wrote to me and said, yes, you're right. Someday we'll work together. So we corresponded twice a year for 2 years. Didn't see the man again. In August of '53, he came back to town and called me on the phone. I was prowling around down Long Beach that day, and the Acres of Books, one of the greatest bookstores in the world. Fantastic place. Hooray, okay. Came home that night, said there's a message John Huston had called. Went over to his hotel, put a drink in my hand, said, what are you doing? And I said, nothing right now, just finished a book, Fahrenheit 451, sent it off to the publishers. He says, how'd you like to come to Ireland and write the screenplay on Moby Dick? I says, I don't know. I've never been able to read the damn thing. I said, I'll have to go home tonight. Coincidentally, 4 weeks before, I'd been wandering around the living room one night. I picked up a copy of Moby Dick lying there and turned to my wife and said, I wonder if this is the year when I finally read this. Little knowing that 4 weeks later, I'd damn well better read it. So I went home that night and I said to my wife, say a prayer. She said, why? I said, because depending on what I feel after this evening and late into the night, I'm going to read as much of this book as I can. And I've got to be honest, I've got to go back tomorrow and say to him no or yes, depending on how I feel. And I don't want to lie, and I don't want to do a job I can't do, especially for my hero. I want to start at the top and stay at the top with him. So how did I read the book? Not from the beginning, and not any other way except diving into the middle of it, which is the greatest way to read any book, isn't it? Do you use libraries in the same way I use libraries? I'll tell you how I use them. I never take lists with me. I never listen to any friends or teachers or anyone about what I read. I go and I dive into the middle of a library and I surface spouting books. I grab them off the shelves like this and I open them, and I'm in love or I'm not in love. That's the important thing. That's the whole thing. And if you love a book, God, you take it and you run out of the library with it. And that's the way you were when you were 10. That's the way when you were 14, when you're 18, when you're 27, and God knows the same way for me today. The same sort of fantastic thing like when you find The Saviors of God by Cousin Zacchaeus, one of the great books of our time, which I discovered about 9 years ago. I went mad for the damn thing. But no one told me to be mad for it, you see. I discovered it on my own. And then when you feel this desire to live with the book, to snuff it up your nose and blow it out your ears, that's a great book, huh? No one has to tell you that. So the same way I use libraries is the same way I got out a diving board and jumped into the middle of Moby Dick. And I surfaced in the middle of the whole section where he describes all the whitenesses of all the midnights of all time, the polar whitenesses, the Antarctic whitenesses, the whiteness of the panicked creatures which rise up from the deeps, which are born so far down below the surface of the world they have no eyes and rise blind to the surface. The whole section on the great jets of the whale, the fountains of Versailles, somehow put to sea and sprinkling the deeps at midnight with these gigantic founts of sparkling diamonds. And then I turned to the section toward the last where Ahab stands at the rail and says, "It's a mild, mild day and a mild-looking sky, and the wind smells as if it blew from the shadow of the Andes, where the mowers have lain down with their scythes." And I turned back to the beginning of the book and read, "Call me Ishmael," and I was in love. And I took the job. I went back the next day. I'd only read half the book that night, and that's a hell of a lot of book to read. So 3 or 4 in the morning, and I finished reading it the best way to finish reading Moby Dick on the afterdeck of the United States ship crossing the Atlantic at 2 in the morning in a 90-mile-an-hour hurricane. And boy, God inspired me with that storm. So here I was, Ahab, on the boat, finishing the book and landing in Ireland and going to work for Houston and being terrified suddenly. It was the first time in my life I'd ever had any money, the first time I'd ever traveled. I was 33. I'd never had any money to travel. Always wanted to go somewhere and see something. And ached, my romantic heart ached to see far places. And suddenly here I was in Dublin with all the poverty and 20 days of rain a month and Moby Dick on my back and the spirit of Melville hovering at my elbow and Houston at the other one. Can you imagine the burden of responsibility that I had? And I had severe depressions, severe inclinations towards suicide that first 6 weeks because I thought I'll never make it. I'll never do good enough to please my heroes, to please the ghost of Shakespeare that inhabits Melville, the ghost of Melville I'm trying to get to inhabit myself so I can do the job. So when I finished the first 60 pages around about Thanksgiving, I went out to Houston's huge country house outside of Dublin, out along the River Liffey. And I arrived early that morning, and I gave him the first 60 pages. I said, "Now, I'm going to ask you a very unusual thing. I have a 26 weeks contract with you. I've only worked 6 weeks. But after you read what you read here today, if you want to fire me this afternoon and send me home, you don't owe me anything. You will cancel out the remaining 18 weeks or so, and you don't have to pay me for any of those weeks." Well, I didn't have to say this, but it's the way I have to work. I said, "I want to be judged on what is here. If it isn't right, get someone else, and I'll go home with my family." I went upstairs in this old country house to wait for him. He was downstairs by the great fire reading the script all the morning long. Around about 1 in the afternoon, he came to the bottom of the stairs, and the most beautiful words I've ever heard came floating up to the second floor. "Ray, come down and finish the screenplay." Big burden lifted from me. I wasn't suicidal anymore. I even put up with the weather. And I put up with the poverty, and I put up with the church in Ireland and all the rest of it. But the really remarkable thing happened at the end of about 20 weeks of work. I've been reading and rereading Moby Dick 8 or 9 times during that period. And I wound up over in London during the last 4 weeks of writing the screenplay. And I got out of bed one morning in London and I looked in the mirror and I said, "I am Herman Melville." And I was. And on that single day, in one afternoon, I rewrote the last 40 pages of screenplay. And next time you see the film on TV or in a theater, look at those last 40 pages. They were all done, the last 40 minutes, all done in one day when the ghost was in me. And that's really it. In order to write a good screenplay, you have to know the work of another person as well as your own soul and your own work, or else you can't do it. And it takes roughly 6 months to a year, or even longer, depending on the work and how fortunate you are. And luckily, I was grounded in Shakespeare. And I found out after I had finished the screenplay and began to do research on Melville's life in years later, that of course the Moby Dick that we're all familiar with is not the original book, that he had done another version, and that someone in the middle of writing the book had lent him a complete set of Shakespeare. And Melville read these and marked them, and Shakespeare in turn marked his life, so that Moby Dick is the direct result of a collision between Herman Melville and Richard III and Lear and Hamlet and Othello. And these instruct him. So you see, next time you see the film, it's the work of Shakespeare and his bastard son Melville and Melville's bastard son Bradbury, isn't it, huh? Combination of these fantastic people. You're not going to get a fake humble here, are you? No. I've had to survive. I've had to learn how to believe in myself and what I wanted to do. And I've always known those people who were good for me. Shakespeare has always been good for me. Melville has been good for me. And Bernard Shaw is an old friend. I carry him around, and we stay up late nights on trains going across the continental United States, and we talk until 2 or 3 in the morning. And we usually wake G.K. Chesterton and let him in on the conversation. And a number of other people like that. Lauren Isley is one that travels with me everywhere. Poets, philosophers, idea people, romance people, language people. There hasn't been enough language in our time, has there? And we have to have a rebirth on 2 levels. Rebirth of language, which I intend to put into theater myself if I have to do it all by myself. And it's a lonely business because there are not many people trying to write through the inspiration of people like Shakespeare. I brought with me tonight, and you can't escape it, I've done a play on Moby Dick mythology, and a play directly influenced by Shakespeare and by Melville, and it's called Leviathan 99. And it's a story late in the future in which I take all of the symbologies of the whaling ship and turn them into rockets, all of the things of the sea turned into space, all of the events from Moby Dick changed by an immense space change into symbols of the year 2099, in which a blind captain of space goes out after 40 years seeking this great white creature that put out his eyes when he was a young man and now is returning very late in time. And this great white thing is a comet called Leviathan. And so everything is a one-to-one relationship between Moby Dick here and the symbology I've carried into the future. There are actually maybe 40 words borrowed from Melville in the entire play. All the rest is fourth-rate Shakespeare and first-rate Bradbury. So allow me to read you the first page of the play and a few others, if you'll permit. Call me Ishmael. How's that grab you? Okay. So far, so good, huh? Okay. Ishmael, in this year 2099, when strange new ships sailed toward the stars instead of under them, attacked the stars instead of fearing them, a name like Ishmael. Yes, my parents flew with the first brave ones to Mars. Turned less than brave, gone sick for Earth, they turned back home. Conceived in that journey, I was born in space. A child so birthed in desolations, homeless between yestermorrow and noon's midnight. Must have a proper name. My father knew his Bible and recalled another outcast who wandered dead seas long years before Christ. And I, being so far the only child conceived, fleshed, and delivered forth in space, how better to name me than as my father did, touching the warm place where I hid in the days before my birth, and he did indeed call me Ishmael. And it's the story then of this young astronaut who says, "Some years ago I thought I would soar about and see all the seas of wind that roam the world. Whenever it is a damp November in my soul, I know it is high time to take to the sky again. There is a magic in air that pulls all men, and man so drawn floats up with eagle, hawk, fire wind, or whispering balloon to test the cloudless winds that circle sweet seas of grass and salt seas of brine until at last he faces on that greater sea of space with its billionfold of stars." And so, on a Saturday late in the year 2099, borne upon my own jet packet power, I duly arrived at Cape Kennedy and hung upon the air a fledgling bird among yet greater birds of fire and steel, and felt the floodgates of the vast and waiting universe swing open in my soul. And he goes down and registers and moves into a spaceman's hostel and is assigned a cubicle, and before going upstairs is drunk a toast to by the various astronauts there, who warn him that upstairs in his cubicle the creature from another world out past Andromeda will be waiting for him, and perhaps it is a giant spider. So he goes upstairs and he thinks to himself, I've tried so hard to like spiders all of my life. But this one may be an 8-foot spider, and that makes it awfully difficult, One does have one's prejudices. And he enters the room, and there's this large shape which rises up and terrifies him for a moment. And, of course, it is Quell, or Queequeg, if you wish, who is indeed he's 8 feet tall, but a man. He has a faintly green skin, but a set of regular eyes in the proper places, and an extra finger on his 2 hands, but outside of that is not so disproportionate. And they then go in search of their rocket and sign aboard, and in doing so, they go off to the space chapel the night before they take off for deep space. And they enter and make their way among bright tombstone plaques which whispered the fates of lost astronauts in their wandering graves. David Smith, lost near Mars, July 2050. William Bow, adrift beyond Jupiter, 2067. Samuel Tease. Roger Hingston, 2087, killed by meteor swarm, buried in space. And Ishmael says, "Traveling graves, yes. What better place to be buried, cast forth on a sea of measureless stars and eternal cold? Such men, their spacesuits, both coffin and shroud, stay young forever. Come back 1 billion years from this noon, and what would you find? Fast frozen, the young man you knew at breakfast 10 million morns lost ago. No worm has touched, no rain destroyed him. All summer flesh, he will circle the sun like a tiny moon until the last sands have run through the hourglass of creation. Who would not want such graves in the fair cosmetic that space can give?" And these voices repeat and repeat, and these images of bodies float over the top of the cathedral in memoriam to the men lost in space. Henry Rogers, Douglas Hempstead, Manuel Rodriguez, lost beyond Saturn, lost. In the pulpit, at the center of the Spaceman's Chapel, stood a man who had died 100 years ago. Dead, yes, but so remarkable a man was he that they did computerize his soul. That is, made up his voice on tapes, made circuitries of his merest breath and motion, then locked it all in plastic, flesh, and steel. So now before us stood Father Ellery Colworth, a monster robot? No, gentle essence of the man. And he speaks, and this is what he says. "Is God dead? An old question now, but once hearing it, I laughed and replied, no, not dead, but simply sleeping till you chattering bores shut up. The better answer is, are you dead? Does the blood move in your hand? Does that hand move to touch metal? Does that metal move to touch space? Do wild thoughts of travel and migration move behind your flesh? They do. You live. Therefore he lives. You are the thin skin of life upon an unsensing earth. You are that growing edge of God which manifests itself in hungers for space. So much of God lies vibrantly asleep. The very stuffs of worlds and galaxies they know not themselves. God reaches for the stars. You are his hand. Creation manifest. You go in search. He goes to find. You go to find himself. Everything you find along the way, therefore, it will be holy. On far worlds you will meet your own flesh, terrifying and strange. but still your own. Treat it well. Beneath the shape, you share the Godhead. So what my priest here is saying is the thing that Bernard Shaw and others before him spoke of constantly, or the last few centuries. The fact we inhabit a universe of matter and light, and that whole thing of the bombardments of all the materials, all the matters of the universe, all the vibrations of the universe, making themselves over into thought and to will. This is the fantastic thing. We are the thing out of all this mindless motion that knows itself. That's the remarkable thing. So the sciences and the theologies share this ignorance. They don't share a knowledge, they share an ignorance. Both are equally ignorant about the same subject. There is no gap between science and theology. We share these ignorances because we know nothing. Starting with that, you move out into space to discover what we are. And we're part of the universe that wakens here. We are the thing that comes awake. That's great. I accept that. That means we have to be 10 times more responsible to the gift than we've ever been. And I like that. I like being responsible. I want to share that responsibility with you. That means you have to be better too, don't you? Because you're part of this thing that's come alive here. You're part of this miracle. We don't know a damn thing about it. Nothing so far. That makes it all the more exciting. We have to keep that fire burning. We are the thing that came out of the sun 3 billion years ago. We're still burning. We're still alive. And we're the thing that knows itself. So this is why I'm interested in space travel. This is why I keep coming back to write about it, to do poems about it, to do plays about it. I wonder if most of you have seen over the years the film Things to Come, the H.G. Wells film. Most of you? Huh? That's not too bad. You ought to get it and run it here sometime in the near future. Because there's a scene there that reminds me of our times during the last year. There's a scene where this mob of intellectuals runs along the edge of a cliff and approaches the rocket site. And Theotokopoulos, I think his name is, played by Sir Cedric Hardwicke, cries out to the rocket and to Passworthy and Cabal and says to them, "Turn back, desist, no more of this, stop. Will mankind never know peace? Turn back from the stars, dismantle the rocket. Away with all of this." And there's a tremendous concussion, and the space projectile shoots this tiny seed toward the moon. And aboard this rocket are the son and the daughter of Cabal and Passworthy. And Passworthy turns to Cabal in front of this huge image of the universe cast on this astronomical mirror and says, "Yes, will mankind never know peace? Must we go on this way? Never, never know peace?" And Cabal says, "Yes, and its name is death for the individual man. But for mankind, never peace. There will never be peace. It's all this or nothing. Stay in the dust, go down to the worms, go back to Stonehenge, or go out here. Because if we stay here, we're doomed. We are doomed upon this planet. So it's all or nothing. Choose." And the voices from the stars in concert say, "Which shall it be? Which shall it be? It's us to will ourselves to survive." This is what space travel is entirely and completely about. It is a religious enterprise whereby mankind relates himself to the total universe because we know nothing and are fearful of death. And that's what all of space travel is about. It is not a military enterprise. It is not a technological feat. It is a theological and religious and loving necessity whereby those who love life, which to guarantee life to generations of people 1 billion years from tonight. That's what the whole thing is about. Now, 1 billion years from this evening, people looking back from outer space will speak of your generation because yours is the generation that did this thing. We all share this wonderful thing together. And say to themselves, "God, I wonder if they knew they were alive in the greatest age that ever happened to mankind. The night that we gave up gravity and reached up to touch." I was in London that night 3 years ago when Apollo 11 mooncraft touched down. And I was supposed to be on the David Frost show. I got over there around 8 o'clock. I think we landed at the moon about 8:30. I waited till 9:30 to go on. Nobody asked me. Finally, around 10 o'clock, they put on that great space expert, Engelbert Humperdinck. I knew I was in trouble. Nobody was going to ask me what I thought about space. I thought of all the nights in history when they needed a poet, and that's what I am. That's my business. I'm not a science fiction writer. I'm a poet moralist. I'm a poet moralist brought here to instruct you to your moral obligations toward the future. And no one asked me. Suddenly I was out on the sidewalk. The producer came running out. He says, "What are you doing here?" I says, "I don't know. I came out for some air, but I think I'm going to get a taxi." He says, "You can't do that. You can't leave." I says, "No, I'm going to leave. I'm going to leave. Just take your hand off my elbow." And he says, "Oh, you're not nice." I said, "No, let's get our priorities right. You're not nice. I don't like you. I don't like David Frost. I don't like the director. I don't like the show. Goodbye." And the next morning, one of the London newspapers says, "Armstrong walks at 2 o'clock, Bradbury walks at midnight." Walked the hell out of the show. Went over to NBC, did a show on Telstar around the world at 2 in the morning with the Bishop of Geneva, Lord Ritchie Calder, the scientist, and Bernadette Devlin from the north of Ireland. Well, I'm in big trouble again, because they, like all of the intellectuals, a hell of a lot of the intellectuals of our time, are wrong. Don't trust 9 out of 10 intellectuals. They're always wrong, and they're always 20 years late. They can't see the future, though it's right across the threshold. I've had to put up with this nonsense for quite a few years now, roughly 30 years of nonsense about space travel. And they're pulling the same sort of crap that I've heard so often, again and again and again. Why are we spending all that money on the moon when we could be spending it down here? You know, we need it for the north of Ireland, and we need it for Poughkeepsie and Chickamauga and various other places like that. You know, and I said, now wait a minute, let's get all this straight. First of all, in all these years of endeavor, the last 15 years, we have not spent one nickel, one dime, one penny, $1 on the moon. We have spent nothing on the moon at any time in our history. It's all been spent right here. Not on the moon. Right here to feed people, to put roofs overhead, to build transit systems, to put up factories, to put bread in mouths, to educate. It's all been spent. What do you think? There's a big hole on the moon somewhere? We take bins of money up and throw it in? It's ridiculous. What kind of thinking is this, He said, it's a shame. I said to Miss Devlin, I said, now look, God, I lived in Ireland for 6 months, and if there's anything I know about the Irish, it's that the front part of your tongue moves, the back half's not connected to your brain. Well, she hadn't been talked that way to in years, you know. She's had it pretty free and easy, and she's a pretty fast talker, but she met her match that night. And I said, Miss Devlin, I said, shall I tell you what you are in the face of this greatest night in the history of the world, the history of the universe? What do you call yourself? She said, a hooligan liberal. I said, you're not a hooligan liberal. You're a reactionary conservative. Bang! Right through. I got her right against the wall. You can't call a liberal that. Isn't that dirty, huh? Aren't I mean, huh? I'm not a Christian gentleman, are I? Yeah. Well, she was flabbergasted. She'd never been called a conservative ever in her life, you know. I don't know if she's ever forgiven me, but I don't care, you know. Because I've had it from these people who are wrong. Now I said, you want some money? You want money for civil rights? I'll help you get it. You want money for the cities? I'll help you get it. You want money to clean up the smog? I'm in there working. You want money for rapid transit? I form the group. Shall I tell you where to get the money to clear up all these troubles? Get it from the military. They have it all. They've always had it all. Jesus Christ, that's the big money. 1 penny goes into space. For every penny, there's $1 billion goes into Vietnam to destroy. Now, come on. Where are our priorities? Which is the honorable thing? Touching down on the moon for all of mankind, or destroying 500,000 people in Vietnam? You mean to say that's a priority, huh? The military has $35, $40, $50 billion a year. Let's take it all away. I've been saying that for 10 years. It's not Johnny-come-lately, you know. I didn't show up late in the game and say, what a shame, Vietnam. I said it the month de Gaulle advised Kennedy not to go there. Have you forgotten? Go get your history books. Read what de Gaulle told Kennedy. This is the kind of ammunition you need, valid ammunition, to give to older people when they argue about the validity of Vietnam. De Gaulle said to Kennedy 10 years ago this month, don't go in there. We have 100 years of history with the French being there. And if you go in there, you'll destroy your country. That's what de Gaulle said to Kennedy. And Kennedy turned his back on him, walked out, and put our troops in. There's history. There's history. Remember that. Tell that to the people when you want arguments. Don't hand them any bull that you make up. Go to the history books. Record this in your head. And then the day that we lost the Vietnam War, what day was that? The day we allowed Diem to be assassinated. And Kennedy okayed that. And we all stood back and we applauded because President Diem was a nasty man, right? But we were in there to guarantee elections, weren't we, huh? Democrats were in there to guarantee elections. So we let the word get around among the military in Vietnam, and they conveniently took Diem off and slaughtered him. And 3 weeks later, Kennedy was killed the same way, and Madame New said, how does it feel? How does it feel? Nasty people, We lost the moral war that week 9 years ago. These are facts. Argue with the facts if you're going to argue. And I was there and I saw, I've told this story time and again over the years. Told at a party one night 3 years ago. All of my friends at the party said, that never happened. That never happened. Luckily, was it NBC had the white paper 6 months ago and verified all this that I've told you tonight. A shoddy examination of our recent history. Go do your research on this if you want to argue me on this, and you can't. There's no way of blinking our assassination of that man. So, what am I saying? Down with Vietnam, up with space. That's what I'm saying. Because this is an honorable and a beautiful thing we're doing that can guarantee the morality and the idealism of the world. And thousands of years to come, not this year, not 100 years from now, but 10,000 times, a million years from tonight. So anyone that tangles with me about space is in for big trouble, because I bothered to do a little research, and I can tell the difference between our priorities. It's just lay off the military for 2 years. Tell the Russians and Red China we're going to take a couple years off, and they have things to do at home too. We already have enough bombs to kill everyone 10 times over, right? How many times can you kill a person? Kill them once and then jump on them? Ridiculous, huh? Okay, I've kicked the horse, that's it. Let me read you a poem. Lock the doors, please. This is a poem on... Whoops, it's too late. Okay, all right. You're going to miss something good. Okay, all right. This is a poem that sums up my feeling on space travel that I did a couple days before I went out to Caltech in November for the trans-circuiting of Mars. And the poem goes like this. The fence we walked between the years did balance us serene. It was a place half in the sky where in the green of leaf and promising of peach we'd reach our hands to touch and almost touch that lie, that blue that was not really blue. If we could reach and touch, we said, 'twould teach us somehow never to be dead. We ached, we almost touched that stuff. Our reach was never quite enough. So Thomas, we are doomed to die. Oh Tom, as I have often said, how sad we're both so short in bed. If only we had taller been and touched God's cuff, his hem, we would not have to sleep away and go with them who've gone before. 1 billion, give or take 1 million boys or more, who, short as us, stood tall as they could stand, and hoped by stretching thus to keep their land, their home, their hearth, their flesh and soul. But they, like us, were standing in a hole. Oh, Thomas, will a race one day stand really tall, across the void, across the universe and all, and measured out with rocket fire at last put Adam's finger forth as on the Sistine ceiling, and God's great hand come down the other way to measure man and find him good, and gift him with forever's day? I work for that. Short man, large dream, I send my rockets forth between my ears, hoping an inch of will is worth a pound of years, aching to hear a voice cry back down along the universal mall, we've reached Alpha Centauri, and we're tall. Oh, God, we're tall. That's what space travel's about. That's it. Oh, thank you. How about some questions now? I have gone on a bit. You ought yes. Yeah. Did I get a lot to eat when I first started to be a writer? No, I starved for years. You must take a vow of poverty, and which isn't that hard if you have a few good friends and one woman that loves you, and puts up with you, and I did, fortunately. But no, I started when I was 12, and I didn't have an income till I was about 31. That's a long time. But you don't mind because you're doing the thing that you love. And that's the thing we have to keep talking about. I know it's important to every one of you here tonight. If I can somehow impress on you, I wonder how many of you are excited people, enthusiastic people. And if not, why not? And how do you remain in such a state? How can you refuse life? How can you be bored? How can you not be in love with something? I don't understand this. And if you are bored and you are not an enthusiast, why aren't you out searching? The time is so short. Yesterday morning I was 18. Yesterday afternoon I was suddenly 40. Tonight I'm 51. It's all that quick. And I'm so glad that I fell in love when I was 12. I wanted to be a boy magician, the greatest magician the world ever knew. Made it, too. Yeah. So it's this kind of thing. I don't know where your enthusiasms run, but they have to run on your own track. And you can't listen to anyone about this sort of thing. It has to be something wild and foolish and glorious and something that makes you want to be alive and stay alive and get out of bed every day of your life and do it. But there's got to be something like that for each one of you, doesn't there? And who can help you with that? I can only help you with my own enthusiasm and my own line of work, but I can't tell you how to fall in love, just to open yourself up and go do something because you want to do it. And whether it's doing crazy painting or crazy acting or crazy anything that doesn't pay you anything, maybe all of your life long. I've been writing poetry now 35 years. I've yet to make more than a few dollars from maybe one or two poems, and yet I've written them every day of my life. I've been writing plays for exactly 40 years, and I have yet to be paid for one play. I've never made a dime out of anything I've ever done for the theater, and yet I continue to write plays. I love my plays. I think they're glorious. I don't give a damn what anyone else thinks about them, you see. That's the thing. That's the important thing. You do it because you want to do it, and everything else can flake off. It really can. I believe in my plays. Someday, someone's going to like them. Someday, I'll probably get paid for one. But not today and not this year. Every play that you saw at the Coronet Theater of mine, if you saw any of them there a few years ago, I put on myself. No one put those on. I saved my own money, rented the theater, found a director, helped cast the plays, cleaned out the men's room, wrote the advertising, took tickets, picketed my own place. I mean, it was wild, but it's the only way to live, yes. I'm being asked about our present so-called secular society and my view of God. I think I've already given it to you, haven't I, in the words of this robot priest who explains what we're up to. I call myself a kind of rough, wild, renegade, prolapsed Baptist. I would have made a great pope. I'd like to run for the office. It's awfully late, you know. First of all, I have to give up sex. I don't think I could bear that. God, you know, been trying to kick it for 38 years now or so, and I haven't been very successful at it. That's the one thing that's going to keep me off the ticket. But let me read you another ending of a poem which explains the same thing I've already said from the mouth of the priest. And I have this great whale speaking. The title of this poem is Old Ahab's Friend and Friend in Noah Speaks His Peace. And he makes points here that are very similar. And the whale then speaks to the writer of the poem and says, I am the ark of life, you be the same. Build you a fiery whale all white, give it my name. Ship with Leviathan for 40 years, until an isle in space looms up to match your dreams, and land you there triumphant with your flesh, which works in yeast, makes wild ferment, survives and feeds on metal schemes. Step forth on husband's soil as yet untilled, blooded with your wives. Sow it with your seeds, crop harvest it with sons and maiden daughters. And all that was begot once long ago on earth's strange waters do recall. The white whale was the ancient ark, you be the new. 40 days, 40 years, 400 years, give it no mind. You see, the universe is blind. You touch, the abyss does not feel. You hear, the void is deaf. Your wife is pomegranate, the stars are lifeless and bereft. You smell the wind of being. On windless worlds, the nostrils of old time are stuffed with dust and worse than dust. Settle it with your lust, shape it with your seeing, rain it with your seed, water it with your passions, show it your need. Soon or late, your mad example it may imitate. So, we are the thing that moves, and in moving, save God. Those of you who know the work of Kazantzakis know what I'm talking about. I wish I had written Kazantzakis, The Saviors of God, one of the great books of the last 2,000 years, commensurate with the Old Testament and the New. We're already in the midst of having God reborn, aren't we? You know, we discovered he was dead 10 years ago in Argentina, and then time told us a year ago he was coming back. And when time tells you anything, you better believe it. Yeah. So we're looking for new metaphors, really. We're still the same thing that we were. And it's my business to try to find those metaphors and to put them in the right shape so that you will nod your head and say yes, I hope. Yes. That's outside of Paris somewhere. It's been up for years. Of course, there's several monorails in Europe. There's one in Germany. It's been up for about 100 years almost, right? About 80 years anyway. Yeah. And, of course, we Americans are going to discover some of those things someday and build them or extend the Disneyland monorail inland. It's getting late. How about yes?
There was something in there that the people were always touching themselves. What was that?
Yeah, it's part of the introverted society, the pill-oriented society that he was trying to add to. It's part of the thing I had in my book, not quite as stated in quite the same way, but I indicated that Mildred, her name was in my book, used pills all the time, and not only that, had these things stuffed in her ears so that she was completely out of touch with reality. And so he carried it the next step with more people on the train going around like this, where it's back to a childish existence, the sort of thing a baby does, discovering itself, going back to that state. Yes? In Fahrenheit? Were you speaking of Fahrenheit? Yeah. Okay. Yes, of course. It was a very bad time when I wrote the book. Joe McCarthy was at the height of his powers 20 years ago. And I was angry about that. But I also wrote the book as an examination of my own soul. It's interesting in the film tonight how Truffaut tricked all of you. Wasn't there one book that you saw burning there that you were glad to see burning? Huh? Wasn't that interesting? You say, okay, that's all right, Genet, I don't like him, you know. Put him in the fire. Or Defoe always bored me, it's okay, you know. Or Mad Magazine if you don't happen to be a mad enthusiast as I am. But he got his innings all along the way, either pro or con, and tricked all of you who are Catholics into saying, well, that's a Protestant book, go ahead, burn it. All of you who are Jews saw an Arab book there somewhere and said, okay, that's fine, burn that. Huh? So the great thing about this film is it takes no sides because you cannot take sides. The history of the world is the taking of sides and the destruction of humanity as the result. Wouldn't it be great if the Catholics and Protestants sat down with each other in Ireland tomorrow, and the Jews and the Arabs sat down and made peace? Huh? Because they're both wrong, and they're both right at the same instant. And each looks at the other and sees an evil face in the mirror, and it's his own face. Terrible, terrible paradox, terrible paradox. And I look on myself as a polarizer, depolarizer, to get rid of those polarities, to get people to sit down and make do. Between men and women, between an old and young, between black and white, between Russian and American, between Chinese and American. Depolarize all of that so that we can have the kind of world that we want. One last question now.
Sir?
Yeah.
Don't you think the introduction of the love scene with Montag greatly weakens the character as Linda as the plastic person she was supposed to be? Or was that just for box office or something?
Well, that particular love sequence was one she learned from television. Did you notice? That she hooks her foot around behind him and throws him with something that you saw 5 minutes before on the TV set.
But in the book, wasn't his wife supposed to be like very cold and just gone?
Oh no, I was talking about the wife. You're talking about the girl next door now, right?
No, I'm talking about the wife. They said she'll wake up hungry, and she woke up hungry.
Well, they changed the names on me, so it's very confusing.
Linda was his wife.
Yeah, right. Okay. And no, I think most of her sequences were of a piece. I think he wanted her to be a little more sympathetic than I had her in the book, I think, if you read the book. But it's interesting that the one sex scene that occurs there is the result of her taking pills and the result of her waking up with the hunger the next morning. It isn't real sex the way we think of it. It isn't love. And then she does the thing that she saw on television. So it's sort of a piece there. Yeah. I guess it's getting fairly late, and I should let you all go. Thank you very much, and good night.